Hi everyone, welcome to activity report number 4, iteration exercises. So we have two exercises on this report. We have the exercise number 1 and the exercise number 2. Both of them are using iteration. So let's break down each one of them. So let's go with the first one. In the first one, it says, write a Python program designed to interactively gather numeric input from the user until the user decides to end the input session by typing end. Upon termination of the input session, the program should compute and display the following statistics. The total sum of all numbers entered, the count of numbers entered, and the average value of the numbers entered. Additionally, ensure the program handles potential errors gracefully. Specifically, the user inputs anything other than a numeric value, the program should provide an appropriate error message and proceed to the next input. And let's go with line by line of the code. So here we have the initialization. We start by setting two variables, total and count, to 0. These variables will be used to keep track of the sum of numbers entered, total, and the count of numbers entered, count. As you can see, we have both of them initialized as 0. Now we have two variables there. Now let's go with the while true. So we have a loop here, and it's an input loop. We have a while true loop, which means it will run indefinitely until we specifically tell it to stop inside the loop. We use try and except to handle potential errors. This helps us to deal with situations where the user might enter something that is not a number. We ask the user to input a number using the input function and store it in a variable called entry. We have here the variable called entry, and it says enter a number. We check if the user entered, and if they did, we use the break statement to exit the loop and move to the next part of the code. If the user didn't enter and, we try to convert the input to a floating point number using float. This allows us to handle both whole numbers and numbers with decimals. If the conversion is successful, we add the number to the total and increase the count by 1. If the conversion fails, for example, if the user enters a word instead of a number, which we catch the value error using except and print invalid input to let the user know there was a mistake. So here we have the try, and it says entry equal input, enter a number. So here's where the user has to write a number. If entry equals and, it goes to the break, so it goes to the next part of the code. If that is not the case, it goes to this part that it says num equals float entry. That's where you are saying that the number that the user is going to write is going to be a float. Now we have uh, two iterations here. We have iterations here. We have the total and count. This is total plus equal num. So each time the user writes a number, it's going to add to this part, to total. So for example, if the user writes 1, in the first case, the total is going to be 1. If the user writes 2, in the next case, it's going to be 1 plus 2, and there's going to be 3 in total. And in count, in that case, will be 2, because there were 2 iterations there. And if the user writes anything that's not a number, it's going to print down invalid input, because we have the except value error here. And that's all the important part of the code. Now let's go with the example. Let's run the program. So enter a number. Let's put that 12. As you can see, it asks the user again for a number. If the user were to write AND, in this case, the program should go to the break part and the code um, will end there. So let's go with that. So the number is 12.0 because we're using float. And the number of iterations there were one, and the how you can say um, and the average was 12 as well because there were only one number. So let's run it again, and let's go with 12 as well, and 13, and 4, for example. Now let's go with an AND. Now the total will be 29 because if we add 12 plus 13 plus 4, that's a 29 there. 29.0 because we're using float. 3 because there were 3 iterations, and 9.6 because that that is the average of the 3 numbers we just write. Now let's go with the second exercise. Exercise number 2. Exercise number 2. Develop another Python program that extends the functionality of exercise number 1. Similar to exercise number 1, this program should prompt the user for a list of numbers. However, instead of computing the average, it should determine and display the maximum and minimum values from the list at the end of the input session. So let's break down the code, shall we? We have the initialization part. Here we have maximum and minimum. We are using none because it gives two value. Well, uh, initializing the variables maximum and minimum to none is useful because it allows us to distinguish between two situations. When numbers have been entered yet, when no numbers have been entered yet, I mean, and the second situation is when numbers have been entered but not valid maximum or minimum has been found. So that's why we're using none in these two. Okay, so let's break down the code. We're using the same while true, try and except value. This is when the user writes something that is not a number. Okay, so we have a while true loop, which means it will run indefinitely until we specifically tell it to stop inside the loop. We use try and except to handle potential errors, as I just mentioned before. We ask the user to input a number using the input function and store it in a variable called entry as the first exercise. And we check if the user entered AND. If they did, we use the break to exit the loop and move to the next part of the code as the first exercise. If the conversion is successful, we compare the numbers maximum and minimum. If maximum is none, which means no maximum has been set yet, or if the current number is greater than maximum, we update the maximum to the current number. And similar, if minimum is none, no minimum set yet, or if the current number is less than minimum, we update the minimum to the current number. So we're using is non-R or is non-R in the two situations, in the if maximum and if minimum. Output. Well, after the loop ends, either because the user entered AND or an error occurred, we check if maximum and minimum are still none. If so, it means no number were entered and we print no numbers were entered. If numbers were entered, we print the maximum and minimum numbers were found. Overall, this code asks the user to enter numbers until they type AND. Then it finds and displays the maximum and minimum numbers entered. If the user makes a mistake and enters something that's not a number, the code lets them know and continues to ask the input. So let's run the code so you can tell what's happening here. This is the first exercise, so let's end it. Now we have the second exercise, and it says again enter a number. So let's put something like a 50. Now it says again enter a number. That's because we haven't write end in this code. If, for example, I write something that's not a number, like for example, let's write number, it should go to the value error there. So let's write down number. It says entrada inválida. So let's enter a number again. Let's go with a 100, for example. It says enter a number, and it goes like that over and over again. So let's go with a 20. Now let's go with a 10. Now let's go with a 250. Let's go with a 2000. Let's go with a 2024. And there you go. Now let's go with an end so you can see the maximum and minimum value. So the maximum value, of course, is 2024.0 because we're using float, and the minimum value is 10 because that's the minimum value we put down. If, for example, if we have write something, let's run it again so you can see what I mean by this. And and if for example we write a negative value, let's go with a minus 12. It accepts the number, and let's go with I don't know, a bigger number, like I'm gonna write a lot of zeros in the right part. Now let's go with an end. As you can see, the minimum value is a negative 1, and it's a minus 12, and the maximum is a bigger number. So it allows us to enter negative numbers in this second exercise. Thank you so much for watching this video.